Hi, thanks so much for joining us for another episode of Weekly Wisdom. My name is Bridget Burns. I'm the Executive Director of the University Innovation Alliance.
Hi, I'm Paul Fain, News Editor with Inside Higher Ed.
And each week I partner with a journalist to bring you a conversation with a sitting college president or chancellor to learn about how they're navigating the challenges of today in the midst of everything, in the hopes that this brings you a bit of inspiration, some perspective to start your week, and just a sense of optimism in the midst of everything. This is Start the Week with Wisdom.
So this week, we're excited to bring you a conversation with Georgia State University President Mark Becker. President Becker has been at GSU for 11 years, and while most of you know that Georgia State is a national model for student success, having eliminated race and income as a predictor of student outcomes, many of you might not know that President Becker has a background in both public health and statistics, which have undoubtedly proven helpful during the pandemic. So let's turn to President Becker.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be with you.
So how are you holding up these days?
Well, holding up pretty well. You know, there's no end to the amount of work and the uncertainty around COVID, but at the same time, when you've been doing this 11 years like I have, you do find a sense of what I'll call work-life balance. So, for me, it's been important to make sure that I put in some time to take care of myself. In my case, that's usually physical activity like bike riding and getting out and being outside and moving around. And so that's helping me hold up, and get through what have turned into long days in front of screens like this.
So what is some of the advice you'd have for your peers who lead other institutions right now during a pandemic and unrest nationwide about systemic racism? It's a lot going on.
Yeah, well, there is a lot going on, and I think there's this is a historic time. There's no other way to put it. It's a historic time in terms of, as a country, confronting the issues of systemic racism, issues around race, and what institutional change is needed across all sorts of institutions, including higher ed. As the same time that we confront a pandemic that is literally a 100-year pandemic, something that none of us has ever lived through before. There's only a very small number of people in the world that were around in 1918 when the last one happened, and they were probably too young to remember it since they'd be 102 right now. So the way I think to look at this is that you have to be able to be flexible. You have to be nimble. You have to accept that there is just a tremendous amount of uncertainty, as we've got a lot of important work to do institutionally to make sure that our institutions come through this pandemic and get stronger at the same time, but we address the issues that are right in front of us around systemic racism.
That's helpful. So I'm mindful that you are really in a unique space, being a few steps from Ebenezer Baptist Church and just being in Atlanta in general. So I want to hear a bit more about kind of how everything's showing up for you. But I also want to draw upon earlier in your presidency, or perhaps back when you were working I saw that you had a role that had to do with emergency preparedness and health. So I was like, wow, that's exactly perfect. Do you have any lessons from back earlier that you're drawing upon today in terms of how you're leading and kind of the perspective that you bring to the day?
Okay, so the title is, when I was at the University of Minnesota, where I was Dean of the School of Public Health, when we went through the SARS-CoV-1, I ended up with the title of, I think, Assistant Vice President for Emergency Preparedness and Public Health Response, or something like that. And that was specifically in response to the institutional response that we had of handling the then SARS epidemic of 2003, I believe it was. So, when we went through that, we did a lot of contingency planning. Sorts of things that we're all, I think every university is thinking about right now is, suppose you have a student in a residence hall or a student who's your responsibility who is now infected, and that individual needs to be isolated and some other individuals need to be quarantined. How are we going to handle that? How are we going to make sure they get fed? How are we going to make sure they get the proper health care, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd say that was a toe in the water version of what we're dealing with now with this pandemic, with a much more infectious agent, SARS-CoV-2, the virus that creates COVID-19.
So obviously one of the big questions right now, how much change will we see in higher education in the next year or two? And what do you think is most likely to happen in terms of change?
Oh, well, this has been an interesting transition since the middle of March, because as people have sort of laid out what could be happening, where we could be going, it keeps changing. So let me paint out what I think will be some of the positives that are going to be positive changes that I believe are going to stick. And that is the work that's underway right now at every university really in the country, certainly at our university, but many, many others. In fact, I was on a call earlier today with universities in Europe and Canada, and same sorts of issues. And so that is the much greater capability in terms of hybrid and online education. And I think as many of us look to the fall, and we look to a student population that does want to be on campus and have some in-person instruction at the same time that we're concerned about social distancing and limiting the spread, containing the COVID-19 pandemic, there's a lot of work around hybrid models of instruction. So if I look out 1, 2, 3, 5 years, I do see that curriculum that we'll be offering in the future is going to offer a much more robust set of modalities, that will, I think, 5 years from now, while we'll still have in-person instruction, and certainly it has an important place in the educational experience for students, particularly for students coming straight out of high school. I also see us having a much more robust set of offerings that are either entirely online or more of a hybrid structure. So, the one prediction that I hope will come true is that a normal college experience, so what I'll call a traditional experience, the 4 to 5 year experience that has typified the mainstream of higher ed that we talk about, will be much more flexible. I hope that we'll have a model where students, when they come on our campuses, will be able to engage in their passions and in their futures much more deeply and robustly earlier on. So if I look backwards at the historical model, we were the sort of a traditional way is you wanted to encourage students to get an internship between their junior and senior years. And hopefully that would lead to maybe a first job or helping them think about what they want to pursue in their careers. I can see with this more flexible model that students will be able to take on internships, say as early as the sophomore year, maybe the middle of the sophomore year, and do it while they're in school. It's not in the summers in between, but a way of having flexibility in scheduling and getting their curriculum where they can be doing more internships while they're in school, getting more practical experience, perhaps taking a look at sort of different career opportunities within their educational pathway. So that's the one I'm most excited about and optimistic about, because I think as we develop this infrastructure, we can bring it to bear so that all of our students will have greater flexibility, greater opportunity for deeper and richer experiences in the future.
That's helpful. I do think that there's plenty to be optimistic about in terms of what we're learning from this. But I want to talk about what it's like to lead in this moment. People who work for you all over Georgia State's campus are showing up on Zoom, talking to their teams and trying to figure out how to be hopeful, how to be optimistic, how to set a vision and get folks inspired to do frankly, work that's harder than it has been before. In the midst of daily news that is terrifying and heartbreaking. And I want to know, how do you as a president lead in the midst of that? What kind of framework or perspective do you bring that allows you to kind of see something hopeful to inspire your team when they're getting inundated in their homes with terrible news every day?
So, first off, Bridget, I'd say the main message that I share certainly with my leadership team and try to share more broadly, including with audiences like this, is the work that we do has never been more important than it is today, right now. If you look at, and Paul in the intro mentioned, the student success work we've done at Georgia State, the very fact that we have a 60% of our students are Pell eligible. We're a majority minority institution. Populations that historically have had much lower success rates, much lower participation rates, much lower completion rates, et cetera, and that we've been able to move that needle so that their success rates are much higher, and we've created more access opportunities. We've become a larger institution to be able to accommodate a large, very diverse student body. The work that we do is even more important right now because these same students are the most fragile right now. They're the most fragile in terms of economically challenged. They generally work in the service industries as they work part-time while going to school. And so what we do is actually become more important, not less important. It's not like we put anything on the side, but we have to continue to keep that in front of us and go forward to make sure that we're providing the best educational experience and outcomes for students who historically have been disadvantaged. Because these are the students that are going to create the future for this country. These are the diverse students that the corporate world, as well as civil society, needs to lead in the future. So it's with that higher goal and aspiration that we have to continue to keep our eye on that ball and stay committed to the work that we started and really continue to up our game so that we do even better for them and do better for society.
So you mentioned, obviously, this is an unprecedented time of unprecedented challenges, but it's interesting to me that you went back to Georgia State's focus on equity gaps. It's not like those challenges weren't there before for American higher ed writ large. It's just accelerated and exposed them in starker relief. And I think, in that sense, is that a reference point of kind of a mission, your North Star that you can really work through even in a time like this?
Well, first off, Paul, say two things to that, that sort of try to connect them. First off, when you're in a crisis, the North Star is the important part. I mean, this is, for better or worse, I've been through other major economic crises since I started, in senior leadership roles. So I was a dean when 9/11 happened, and we went through the 9/11 crisis as a nation in terms of terrorism coming to our doorsteps, but also the economic challenges and the budgetary challenges that visited upon me as a dean. And then I became president of Georgia State in 2009, not too many weeks before the stock market went to its lowest point and unemployment went to its highest points. So it's not like I haven't been here before. And in both of those cases, and certainly now, what you cannot afford to do if you're in a leadership role is to get so focused on just the moment that you forget about the direction you're going, that you have to have that North Star out there guiding you. You have to know where you want to go. And the metaphor I've used to talk about this twice through those two previous crises and through this one is, we're on a sailing ship, and the captain of a sailing ship, we're being tossed about in a storm. The sky, it's literally black as night. The sky is right above the ship. It's swirling. There's winds. There's buffeting us, the waves. And what we have to do is we got to make sure that we get this ship pointed in the right direction so that when the storm does clear, because the storms always clear, it's just a question of when, not if, that we're pointed in the right direction and we have wind in our sails. So yeah, absolutely. We have to stay committed to our core mission of being able to educate students, recruit diverse students, educate them, help them be prepared for success throughout life. At the same time that we attain to our research priorities and other institutional priorities. So that's one. The second point that's been reaffirming for me, as we've had national Zoom meetings of the various higher ed associations I'm part of, and conversations about, with university presidents about what they're going to do in this moment of looking at issues of systemic racism and race in America. It's one of the things that has been first and foremost that they've all emphasized is their need to eliminate equity gaps, because sadly there are still way too many institutions where underrepresented minorities are even more underrepresented in higher education institutions. The representation's not close to what it is in their states as a percentage of the population. This is particularly among our largest publics. And then secondarily, those students do not have outcomes that put them on a level playing field with the majority or Caucasian populations in those states. And so for me, it's a doubling down, is that, that the rest of my colleagues are now seeing this the way that we've seen it and wanting to commit to it, is only for me is reaffirming that The work that we've done has been the right work to do. It's what's best for the country. It's certainly what's best for our students, my city, my state. But it's never been more important than it is today, and it's never been more important to get that word out and to get out what works to the whole country.
That's great. So I want to ask a question I'm not sure if you can answer. I'll just be honest. In that, oftentimes when I'm working with college presidents, I'm always looking to see how they have designed their life so that they are not just interacting with, sycophants in the echo chamber or just the same voices over and over. And I am wondering how, there are ways that people have engineered their lives to adapt, to make sure that they're getting the right kind of information from the various sources, whether they're in the cabinet level or not. But now it's like a Zoom screen. And I know that you're booked in 15-minute increments from about 7 in the morning until 7 at night. I recently discovered that many presidents don't know about blue light blocking glasses. So for those folks at home, just so you know, you might want to order a pair. I don't think Michael Crow has a pair yet, by the way. So innovators not knowing about a very basic innovation. But I want to know, how are you trying to set yourself up that you're still getting those side conversations that help you understand how folks are really experiencing the work? How are students really hearing and seeing things? Are there any tips for folks who are at home and kind of locked with their Zoom screen? Well,
Bridget, I will answer the question, but it's a hard question to answer. I can't say that I have a great answer to it, because one of the biggest challenges, as you sort of alluded to, is when you're in a leadership position, and certainly it's been my experience, is people tell you what they think you want to hear. That there's not a lot of side conversations and honesty that takes place. So the first thing is you do eventually, if you're going to be successful, is you start identifying people that will speak truthfully with you. Now, there are lots of other people who claim to want to speak truthfully with you, but they have their own agendas. And sometimes those agendas are pure and sometimes they're not. That's the complexity of these jobs. I think the big challenge of the environment we're operating in now, as you've alluded to, is when we're operating virtually, we're no longer at those events with people where you have all those side conversations where somebody comes up and they're people they're people you work with, they're your faculty, they're your staff, they're student leaders, and you get a lot of side conversations and you get a lot of little pieces of information that you can then collect, coalesce, and build on. So you've hit on the hardest problem right now is that we're not getting those kinds of conversations. There certainly are people that are outside of what I'll call my immediate sphere that I call and check in with, but there are only so many hours in the day, and when you're programmed so heavily, and you don't want to spend all your time completely plugged in because people are going to burn out. My single biggest concern about all of us in these roles, and I'm talking about everybody that's working on COVID responses, working on strategically making sure that our institutions move forward to address all the issues of the day, including and very importantly systemic racism, that people are going to get completely burned out because we may be in this mode for another 12 months. And so you've identified a great problem. I don't have a miracle answer at this point, but it certainly is present, and it's one that I'm working on, struggling with.
In the vein of it's a marathon, not a sprint, which is sobering reminder for us all, and burnout, frankly, are you and your peers able to log off from higher ed and draw anything from books, movies, etc. Of late? I know it's a challenge for all of us, but anything you've got there lately that's helped you?
Yeah, first off, Bridget talked about the blue glasses. So I don't need those because I actually do know how to shut things off and shut down at night. And Bridget knows me well enough that she probably anticipated that. So I am not addicted to my email and my text messages. There's a certain point in the evening where I just turn the phone over, and unless it goes crazy, meaning that something big, important is happening, I just ignore it. And the other thing is when I wake up in the morning, my first priority is to get in my workout for the day, whatever the work, and I've got a series of structured workouts and plan over time. So, importantly, I've got this block of time that is mine, so to speak. because once you do start to engage with the day, it holds on to you until you come to that shutdown point. So it takes a certain amount of self-discipline. It's learned over many years. It certainly, for me, wasn't natural. I had to pretty much force myself to be able to shut down in the evenings. The other thing is then, of course, we all have passions, hobbies, interests. And so, I subscribe to a lot of YouTube channels in terms of things that interest me. And so I will just turn on YouTube, and I've got over 20 subscriptions, and just check in on what's interesting today.
What is one of your favorite YouTube channels?
One of my favorite YouTube channels, probably I'll give you a Global Cycling Network, GCN, out of England, which has a tremendous amount of programming and content. But, Trevor Noah's another one. Stephen Colbert is another one. Particularly when the mainstream media is enough to drive you crazy. Sometimes it's good to pick up to get up in the morning and turn on YouTube and see what Stephen Colbert and Trevor Noah have been talking about. So those are a couple examples.
Understood. All right. All right. Well, we'll end with this last question then is for folks who are at home, we have a sense of what we're trying to do is set their week up right. How do you go about this work with a sense of optimism right now? Could you leave us with anything that's giving you hope in the midst of all of this?
Well, I'll start with, I always have hope. I'm a glasses half full person. I have worked through 9/11 as a dean. I've worked through the financial crisis, both as a provost and then as a president. As a dean, also confronted SARS the first time around, different SARS virus, but definitely a similar in certain ways. When I graduated college, I graduated into the worst unemployment since the Great Depression up until now. Basically, I've been around long enough, lived and worked through enough to know that as hard as it looks and as hard as it's going to get, that it will get better. There will be improvements. We will adapt. We will improve ourselves. I've seen tremendous improvements in higher education. In spite of the fact that it's not linear and always getting better, I've seen improvements in all aspects of society. And so I'm optimistic about the future. I see lots of challenge and controversy out there, but I can't let that get me down, because it's the human spirit that lifts us up. It's that people care enough to do the work that matters, to whether it's to take care of their fellow man, whether it's to make sure that others have opportunities that we didn't have, whatever it may be that drives you. The human spirit is always uplifting, and I don't think that we're going to see any end to that. I think that's what gives me reason to believe that we not only will we get through this virus and this pandemic, but I think as a country we'll get better, and we will make tremendous progress in eliminating the issues of structural racism that have been so pernicious and devastating to society, and particularly to people of color, to Black people most recently in terms of these issues, but also other marginalized populations. We're going to get better. We're going to do better. We will overcome.
That's great. No, I agree. And honestly, in going through these series of interviews every Monday, I feel like I have a front row seat to seeing presidents and chancellors, I think, are more connected to their purpose than I've seen in a long time. They're the best they've ever been. They have a clear mission, and every day they are fighting. I feel like also our students, their resilience is on full display, and the kindness and selflessness of our faculty, staff, and administrators as they help each other navigate this is just really, we are in the midst of what appears to be one of the lowest moments. I'm seeing just incredible evidence of the goodness of humanity. So thanks so much for joining us today. And for those of you who are at home, we really appreciate you. And so come every Monday at about this time. We'll be broadcasting live, and we'll be bringing each week a new sitting president or chancellor. And I often partner with my buddy Paul, sometimes Jeff Selingo, a few other journalists along the way. And our hope is that you have a great week. You have a sense of perspective and a bit of hope to bring to the table. So thank you so much. And again, we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks, President Becker.